The group decided to tackle the death sentence thing, and that proved pretty interesting because, of course, we spent probably the first 40 minutes getting past the whole idea that is over here, right? Yes or no. Even though the brief was sort of stating your company, your firm has received carte blanche to move on, and you need to design that. We sort of like got stuck into what should we do, and
should you accept?
Should you accept
as a
it?
designer? Should you do it or not? If you're against the death penalty.
And a lot of that ended up also in this sort of like reconstruction that Jason and Dan did mostly about the fact that there are consequences for both scenarios, both if you say, okay, we'll do it, or if no, we don't do it. Some of them might be also consequences. Jeff was sort of raising the issue that the company could also be in trouble if that was a bidding process, and you already were sort of committed to the project. But mostly like there was an idea that this was also connected to the idea that you don't really know the full consequences of what you're doing. So it goes back to some of the things that we were saying at the beginning. Also the fact that sometimes you are saying yes because you have self-interest in the thing, which might be legitimate from any point of view, including financial needs that take you to say yes. And the fact that you very often do not have all the elements to make a meaningful choice, but you're sort of like part of that. And of course, we needed to go yes, because that was what the brief stated. But it was a very interesting conversation, at least from my part. I've been doing this exercise with students, and that normally is never a problem, because they just jump into yes, and of course follow through. And the question of a year for me now, after today, is like, do they do that because it's sort of like that's what the brief states, and they just follow through because they're students and they've been told that, or just because they're enthusiastic now for the death penalty, given whatever came out of today. So what we have over here is mapping of the different stakeholders that are part of the process, because we felt like we needed to have an overview of who is involved. And Jeff gave us a bit more detail about how Texas works, which is sort of like always interesting. We have everything from clergy to families to the victims, if they are part of the thing, to the firm that employs the designers, the governor, federal government, Texas justice system, the morgue, press, everything is in there. And we try to figure out how they were connected, but not really in a rigorous way. It was interesting for us that even doing this very, very quickly, the Texas justice system and the person being convicted are the two most integrated points where everything sort of like converges to, which makes for an interesting statement about how the whole procedure works. You, Jeff, can explain that.
So
then I can pick it up
this
from
was
here.
sort of a free-form exercise from which we started thinking about what will be the process of once we've said yes, what do we do? So this gave us the beginnings of sort of a stakeholder analysis. Who are all the players? And then later in discussion, the notion of coming up with a collaborative value analysis of how we're going to approach this thing. So working with all these different circles to figure out how we're going to approach it. Then this sort of part two of this, all of the lines as opposed to the circles, was coming up with the existing system mapping, because the complexity of the system is much greater than you'd think, right? So once a person has been executed and you cart them off and clean up the floor, you're done, right? Well, no, so the body has to be disposed of. There are the documentation of that, both in the records and in the press. There's just, it's an ecosystem, really. It's a business, it's an industry in Texas. So that is this, which, as you said, we did a very cursory kind of relationship mapping here. So after that, after we have sort of the system mapping and we've selected the principles, which in this case we were, I'm going to turn so I can read, maximizing reversibility, like the ability to, at the 11th hour, or the 59th minute, and 59th second, say, oh, okay, wait, hold back. Maximizing reversibility, predictability, so that the system can't, you're black, you're on death row, 18 months later you might be dead. You're white, you're on death row, 15 years later, you might still be sitting there in your country club, putting some predictability on it so that the system can't be gamed as much potentially. Clarity about what the steps are, privacy as much as possible, accessibility to the process, accountability, still the principles, and then controls and checkpoints. And we came up with this idea of sort of like, if the middle is somebody being dead, on death row, it's not just linear, it's like conviction to sentencing to incarceration to death. If we think of it as kind of an iterative process, at every point of whatever distinction we make, we say, okay, is there new DNA evidence? Is there new technology? Is there new this? Is there a new appeal? And that it can be predictable. Hopefully we can do two things. One, make the system predictable and easier to ensure fairness. But number two, sort of stretch the system out, which does two things. Number one, it makes sure that you have lots of opportunity to have that 11th hour reversal, so you're never convicting the wrong person. But it also makes the process of killing another human being rather onerous. Since most of us are opposed to the death penalty, if we're going to design a system that puts someone to death, let's make damn sure that it is a weighty and onerous process, so that we can feel as good about it as possible. Which goes back to this original thing. Who better to design it than someone who's against it, because we'll make it as foolproof as we can under the circumstances. I think that covers it. Did you want to talk about? I haven't even read all of your notes yet. So
just one, that's mostly the same principles, but so one of the principles is respecting human dignity, and one observation is that part of it might be respecting religious beliefs, traditions, or non-religious beliefs and traditions, both for the person who's convicted and their family. And just because they're convicted doesn't mean that in their religion they don't still have beliefs that apply in that situation. So there might even be some sort of ritual dimension to the actual process that they go through, or that they have the freedom to apply that in the process.
Yeah, a lot of stuff after death is different death rituals for Muslim people as opposed to Jewish people, and
that's before
time spans and something interesting. Yeah, because I had the same thing that you had, Stacy, where you used the term to unhook yourself from it. I found it very, very difficult. Even though I've done projects which I've crossed an ethical line in doing, and my rationale was I don't have money, which was true at the time, but I've been in those situations personally. And Andrea's point, which I thought was really interesting, was if my job as a designer is to make the world a better place, I could do more good trying to make a bad process better than not engaging at all. And then another kind of perspective which came up was the argument that, unrelated, but I might as well do it because if I don't, somebody else will, as some kind of ethical argument kind of comes into play here. So we got stuck on that first thing of yes or no for quite a long time.
But it's also telling, right? In some ways.
It's very telling, and I would have been comfortable if that's all we presented, because there were sufficient moral issues, moral and ethical issues, to warrant a beneficial process, as per the workshop.
It was interesting to me to actually see that it's enough to move the thing from the realm of fake news to something that is much more radical, like killing other people. And suddenly, the whole process becomes much more stunted. You stop there and you ask yourself, do we need? And I was just sort of like calling the group back to the brief and say, it says we accept it, so we just need to deal with this. But we kept backtracking and saying, but what if we say no? What are the consequences? How could we do it? And do we really need to do this? Which is, of course, a very interesting result from any point of view. Because, of course, not only you might be in a situation like this, even though hopefully not like this, but where you have something that really clashes with what is your ethical beliefs or the way you do things. And that might be an obstacle that is not easy to solve by yourself, but it's even more difficult to solve in a group, because this is nothing that you can call upon the authority of research or something easily. You can still do that and say, you see, these people die better this way, but it wouldn't really move you because it touches upon deeper sort of like foundations. So,
But I think that the yes-no conversation is what got us to our principles.
yeah.
No,
Yeah, sure.
because, no, because, no, because, but the brief says we already said yes.
Yeah.
And so all the no becauses became translated to guiding principles: reversibility,
Absolutely.
transparency,
Dignity.
clarity, dignity.
Did you have any conversations within the group about what to do if confronted with or dealing with the problem of stakeholders who may not believe that prisoners or people who've been found guilty of these kinds of crimes still have human rights?
Deserve dignity.
Right. Like, did that come up at all, that some ethical frameworks drop that when dealing with people who are in prison?
We touched upon that, but not directly. Meaning, this is Texas in the
Yeah.
example, so we sort of like took that for granted.
It came up in as much that we said, put them in a 6x9 room, throw away the key. They'll die eventually. We're not killing, you know.
Yeah.
If you throw cruel and unusual out of it, you can sort of talk about that all day long. But we ultimately decided that was
Yeah.
that we had to like.
We probably
follow
didn't
brief.
get to the finer points over there because we didn't really have the time to go past this initial hurdle. So we had an idea what a process could have been, and this is what Jeff and Dan were detailing, but we didn't get, for example, in the full description of what a scenario would be. That would have probably called in all of the other roles in here, right? Because you have a lot of people that are going to be influential to the process and how it works out. And for some of these people, only the legal system is an obligation. So if the governor has no obligation whatsoever to do things in a certain way, but can delay whatever because of the law, and you find a person who doesn't believe in the idea that a convicted person has rights still, that would derail the whole process in some ways. That's why we also have activists and research in here as well, sort of like as counterpoints.
We did discuss the problem of if you say yes to make something better, yes under the condition that we could do more good by being involved, and you come up with a process that, for example, has dignity within it, and then over the duration of the process, that gets cut out by the whoever's paying the bills. Where does that leave you as a designer? Because it's kind of like, I tried, it didn't work. I'm still possibly left with a feeling sick inside. I don't know. This is why we kept getting stuck on yes, yes or no. It really is fundamental. Another thing that we discussed with regards to yes, no was, what about maybe? What about I don't know? And where do I turn to? Are there mentors? Is there something? I was very facetious and said, where's the ethics section on the IA Institute website? Like, you know, like where can you go to? Who can you turn to help navigate these situations? Also, given the fact that it's so personal.
We, as part of the yes no, we also talked about sort of shared guilt and responsibility and culpability, and could it be a parallel design process? Could it be that the integration of all of the actors is such that everyone bears some responsibility in the decision-making process?
Time to stop. Very good.